Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar on intranet use cases, understanding your potential intranet users and what motivates them. My name is Kelly Backey, and I am the senior content writer here at Thought Farmer. I think we had someone else's picture on the intro slide before, but it is definitely me that is co-presenting here with Amol, and he is our director of sales.
Good afternoon, everyone. Again, my name is Mole. I've been with Thought Farmer for over 8.5 years, and looking forward to providing you guys some information on use cases.
So this webinar is based off a white paper we wrote a few months ago, which stemmed from a lot of conversations we were having with prospects, specifically those driving an intranet project and how they were having difficulty communicating how an intranet could benefit a variety of scenarios in the workplace. And I think as an end user, it can be really easy to dismiss additional technology simply because you weren't presented with a unique scenario of how the solution will benefit you specifically. Use cases are great because they focus on the users of the system rather than the system itself, and they can go a long way in helping you push forward a business case for intranet software. And actually, I'm going to take this opportunity right now to launch a poll to try to understand our audience a little better. Amol, are you able to launch that poll? So if you have a few seconds right now, please respond to the poll with your applicable role. There it is. And also just a reminder, there will be Q&A at the end of this webinar. So if you have a specific use case that you would like to see addressed and maybe we didn't talk about, let us know at the end and we will try to address it. Okay. And did we get
Excellent. Yeah. So I'm going to go ahead and start with just the beginning part of our introduction kind of to use cases here, which is part one. Now, with use cases, really, it's all about kind of understanding firstly, what are use cases? Now, the way that we kind of look at use cases within Thought Farmer and kind of the way that we share best practices with our clients is that it's essentially a document that outlines a tool's functionality in the context of your user action. So it's basically saying, if a user needs to be able to do this, the software will help them do it by doing it this way. So why do you need them? Well, there's a few different reasons why use cases can be helpful, especially in an intranet project environment. Well, firstly, it helps you understand how users will interact with this new platform, and it'll help them reach their goals or solve their challenges. Now, when we're talking about goals and challenges, really we're talking about getting tasks done. Right? So going to the internet, consuming content, being able to complete a policy, be able to connect with a staff member, these are the use cases that we're often thinking about. So when are they useful? Well, as part of a launch strategy, this is quite critical actually, is that you should be able to define at least 5 to 10 use cases that are going to be critical for your intranet to be able to help achieve your goals. Secondly, as part of your intranet cleanup process. So let's say, for example, you're running your intranet for a while, it's been a couple of years. It's always a good idea to ensure and maybe even kind of validate that the use cases that your intranet has been set up to solve is actually doing that work well. Right? Is it efficient in solving those use cases? Is there better ways of going about it? Maybe is there additional functionality that is could be required to be able to even make it better, that use case there for your staff members. Now, as a part of a broader optimization process, so a lot of times what we're seeing in organizations is this kind of need to modernize the internal infrastructure within the organization, but also modernize processes, right? So quick example we'll talk about later is just like paper forms to e-forms. Right, that's a very quick, not a quick transition, but it is an opportunity, very low-hanging fruit for you to be able to really kind of increase efficiency in the organization. So understanding the use case now and how can we make it better. Now, lastly, as part of a vendor evaluation process, and what we mean here is intranet vendors, right? So if you are looking at a new intranet, one of the key things that you want to be thinking about is firstly, really understanding your business objectives, which we'll get into in a minute here as well, but then being able to identify those use cases. So once you have those use cases, you're going to go to your different vendors that you're looking at, and then you're going to be saying, hey, these are the things that we're trying to solve. How do you solve this within your platform and within your processes there? right? And really kind of understanding if that vendor really has good alignment with what product and services they're offering and what you're really trying to achieve with the intranet. Now, how do we draw them up? Well, we're going to get to that later. First, what you really need to do is establish your objectives for an intranet.
Thanks, Amal. Yeah, so we're going to talk about some of the requirements first. I think it's important to establish your business objectives for your intranet. And if you don't already know your intranet business objectives, you can determine them through things like stakeholder interviews. Now, these interviews can be in person, on the phone, or even through an online survey tool. Your intranet affects employees at all levels, but for the purpose of interviews, consider selecting individuals that have the authority to get things done and who are committed to your overall business objectives. So the goal of these interviews is to understand and solidify the exact purpose of your proposed new intranet and how you will achieve it. So you might want to ask questions like, describe the function or team of your department, describe your role, what does a typical day look like for you, what activities do you like the most, least, what is the most time consuming? There's so many questions to ask, and we actually dive quite deep into this into a white paper we have. So if you want additional guidance, you can refer to that white paper. It's the same topic as our webinar. But anyways, the answers you receive will hopefully uncover some strong business objectives for your intranet. And remember, these aren't features, they are business needs or pain points that your new intranet will solve. So from these interviews, you would end up with some sample objectives. So for example, ensure all employees receive important company communication, or simplify and standardize onboarding processes. Or maybe your interviews revealed that employees are spending way too much time on email, so your objective would relate to reducing that. Okay, so now we're going to get into some actual use cases. So the first one we're going to look at is the communications director. And I noticed from the poll that the majority of you are a comms related title. So this one should be fairly straightforward. Intranet technology, as you probably know, hits the heart of comms challenges. So hopefully this group won't require too much information, but there are obviously different hierarchies within the comms department. So if we look specifically at what a communication director may require, it's likely the ability to create news feeds so that employees receive timely, relevant communications tailored to them. And so when you're looking at features, you'll want to highlight things like rich news feed, simple blog creation and publishing, personalized emails, ability to embed external social media and RS feeds, video, commenting for two-way communication. And I think right now, more so than ever, it's important that communications professionals find the most effective way to disseminate important information. Crisis communication is really on the top of everyone's mind right now. There's a lot of uncertainty and changing information related to coronavirus. So it's critical for communicators to find an effective medium to communicate right now.
Excellent. Yeah, and to that point with communication directors, we've heard lots of different types of examples where scenarios like this, we're going through this pretty big medical crisis across the world, and like, how do you share this information in the organization? And a lot of times people are sharing it through all staff emails, but there's still a lot of uncertainty and anxiety with the staff members that they want to be able to have some ability to be able to ask questions as well, right? And have some kind of alleviation of stress. And oftentimes the intranet, and again, the communications director, oftentimes this is your role, right? Like, you need to be able to help translate, what the leadership team is saying, and be able to provide it in a way that your staff are going to understand. Okay, so let's get into the use case number 2. Now we're going to take kind of a almost like the exact opposite of the comms director, which is the IT director, right? So the IT director has different needs, different requirements, different kind of feelings towards the intranet, right? So if we look at an IT director, often it's going to be very technical in regards to some of the use cases they're looking to accomplish. So let's take the first one here that we're going to go ahead and run through. So like, this is one thing that we need to mention as well, is that with use cases, there's certain formats you want to go about with your use cases. And the way that we like to be able to kind of present it is that each task, each objective, you would start with firstly the what, right? So I would like to have Active Directory integration so that we can manage internet users using our existing IT provisioning process, right? So I think in layman terms, what that means is that I want to be able to use the system that we have now, and I want to sync it up with Thought Farmer or with whatever internet, and all that kind of back-end user synchronization is magically happening, right? That's kind of the intention here for the IT director. Why? Well, first and foremost, a lot of times what IT directors are looking for is, single sign-on first and foremost, right? Whatever system they're going to introduce, technology-wise, a lot of times what they're going to be asking is, will you be able to authenticate using Active Directory? Will you be able to authenticate with the other item here, which is SAML authentication, right? Because one of the use cases that you hope to be able to alleviate with any new internet or with any internet is login. That's the biggest barrier for people to use any kind of platform is password login, right? So this seems to be a very simple thing, but for your IT director, this is almost like a must-have, right? That there is some kind of integration with whatever authentication tool that they're using. The other points here, flexible security permissions. This is critical for people that are on the technical side, is just ensuring that from a security perspective, people are seeing the right things, governance is happening on content, but then also security-wise, you're also thinking about the back end as well, right? Like how is the software being set up? What is the deployment options there? And that is something that is mentioned there with cloud and on-premise integration options, especially with Active Directory synchronization. A lot of times there could be differences between cloud and on-premise, and so the IT director is really going to be thinking about how is this being set up in the organization. If we go with cloud, we are going to do Active Directory integration or SAML. How does that actually work? All right, so those are the kind of use cases that they're trying to solve. The user field provisioning is something just along the lines of, we have staff information within Active Directory, like first name and last name and email address. Can we bring that into the intranet and have that kind of pre-populated, right? So those are some of the things that they're asking about from the user provisioning perspective. And then lastly, there is that robust search features. We find that with most IT directors, the want from a lot of the business, the people within the organization is strong search. Right, so they are really tackling this quite often in regards of the evaluation process and just ensuring that search is going to be working in a way that everything within the internet is being searched, but there is lots of other configuration options there as well. So from the IT perspective, you can see these are much more technical in regards to the wants here and what features they're looking for, but you just have to understand this is the audience there as well. All right, I think that we're on to the third use case here, and Kelly will take.
Thanks, Amal. So next we're going to talk about the use case of an HR manager. Similar to comms titles, HR professionals tend to understand the value of an intranet really well. Now there are many possible use cases for HR, but we're going to look at just one. So an HR manager, I would like to have an e-form for personnel changes so that our department can easily process these changes in a timely manner. If you are in HR or work closely with HR, you probably know just how easily this department can get buried in paperwork. So any opportunity to make that easier for them is really going to be successful. So when you're looking for features, be on the lookout for simple form creation, simple workflow and approval process, list management, a dashboard that reveals insights and trends on these forms. And as you're probably seeing a pattern here, all of these use cases are about solving specific employee problems. So for HR, the problem is too many paper forms, and so here's how an intranet is going to fix that.
All right, excellent. Yep, and so the last use case here is going to be around the end user. Just one last point on the forms. Like I think that it's interesting with forms, right, is that this is an opportunity within your intranet where action can take place. A lot of times what we would advocate is that you want to have the opportunity of your staff going to the internet to be able to get something done. And so, it could be as simple as going to the internet to be able to look up somebody's staff information, like their contact information, or it can be as complex as something like an e-form. And as mentioned earlier on, if you have paper forms right now in the organization, so right now the use case is that when somebody wants to fill out a business card request, right, so they have business card request form, you would, download that as a Word document, you would take a pen, you would write it out, you would hand that into the HR team, there's some kind of stamp that's being involved as well, so it's a kind of approval process. You know that there's a better way of going about that, right? And so if you were to transition that from a paper form into an e-form, very likelihood that you're going to have a lot of time saved. And so one of the recommendations is that do a baseline now in regards how long it takes to be able to start a form and to finish a form, and be able to kind of timestamp that. So it may take a week, it may take 2 weeks, and then after that, once you transition into a new form, measure again, right? And you should be able to see a lot of time savings there as well. Okay, we are going to go on to use case number 4, which is end user. End user, there could be lots of different things that your end user wants to be able to do with the internet. There's going to be lots of different use cases there. The one that we're going to kind of focus in on is fairly general. I would like, so this is the what, to be able to find people, find information and documents quickly so that I am not wasting time, right? This is the biggest pain point that we find with end users using any kind of content management system, is the effort that it takes to be able to find content, right? A lot of times it's not intuitive. A lot of times when people are creating content, they're not thinking about how it's structured on whatever site they're using on, they're setting that content up on, and the path to be able to get to that content, right? So a real big focal point for your internet project is going to be the findability of content, right? And so what features to be looking for? Security permissions is going to be important here, because one thing that you can do is that if you're a large organization, you have a lot of content, it's likely that a lot of this content may not be relevant for every role, right? So to help kind of reduce the information or overload is reducing the noise, right? So if you have a whole policy section, there's a 1,000 policies in there. Maybe you set up security permissions so that only certain policies are showing up for certain roles, right? So that's a good example there. Search functionality. This is all about findability of content, right? So they're going to find content through your navigation, but then also they're going to find content through search, right? So having scope search, being able to find subject matter experts, being able to search within documents, all of that is going to be critical. And then also just simply bookmarking is going to also be a critical kind of feature for your end users. People Finder and Expertise Finder, those kind of go hand in hand. Essentially, a lot of times with these modern intranets, you'll have like a very robust staff directory. Within the staff directory, there should be a whole bunch of profile information on each staff member, and that's where you find those skill sets, right? So for example, I want to find somebody in our organization that speaks French, but is also part of our Whistler branch, right? So then you should be able to kind of search through the employee directory and be able to find that person quickly. Finding the content that's relevant to my job. So I think that's kind of in line with security permissions. Again, being very thoughtful in regards of how you are presenting content to your end user. Now, this point here about up to date on the latest company communications, I think this is something that is like, it seems obvious, right? To be able to do this and do it in a way that people are aware, but people don't do it always well, right? And so I think it's critical for your staff to be able to have the opportunity of consuming this company information, and it's really important for you to be very frequent in that, right? Especially like in times like this where there is some uncertainty. It is very important to over communicate in these times, and the internet is a good opportunity for you to be able to share that information. And if you're doing it on such a frequent basis, they're going to keep coming back, right? Like the one kind of arch nemesis of an internet is still content, especially on the homepage. So on the homepage, you really want to worry about frequency of content, news information, and ensuring, again, which is the next point, the news information is going to be tailored to that person's role, but they're also getting that global information that's important as well. Lastly, there is just staying connected to colleagues. This is important in regards to just connecting with staff. There was this great story that we had from a client of ours, Cummins, Western Canada. This is from a few years back, but there was 600 employees. They have their head office, and their HR team is part of the head office, but there's lots of different smaller offices with a lot of people that are working in these smaller offices as well. So one of these employees was going to come into the main head office and have this HR meeting. So there was this back and forth between the HR manager, who also owned the intranet, and the staff member. And once that person had come into the office, they had mentioned to the HR managers that, hey, I actually went onto the internet, went to the staff directory and looked you up before I came here. So it was really cool to be able to just kind of connect and see your face and, and what you're all about. And she said the same thing to him, right? Before she had that meeting, she did go to the staff directory and did the same thing. And I think it just kind of like reduces the kind of walls between staff members, especially if you haven't seen each other in your different offices. It kind of gives you the opportunity of connecting people. All right, so I think the next use case here is project manager, and that's me too. Okay, so project manager, very kind of like Not every organization has a lot of project managers, but you do have somebody that is going to be likely using the internet to be able to manage projects. And usually these projects you're managing on the internet are moments in time, right? There's some kind of community event, there's some kind of charity event, there is some kind of project you're working on with the client, and you want to be able to kind of organize content. So this use case is around, I would like to, so the what, is have a location to be able to store file versions and updates on projects, so that cross-functional teams can easily organize documents and collaborate on projects. So what are the features that a project manager may look for? Again, security permissions, right? Because security permissions will allow you to be able to set up these groups, set up private groups if you need to. If you want to have some documents that are just shared with certain people in the organization, security permissions should allow that. Now, mobile friendly, you're seeing this more and more, is that especially now, people are not going to be tied to their desks. Maybe they're not even working from home, working from the office anymore, right? They could be working from home, mobile friendly, right? So being able to access the internet through a mobile device, that is something that we're finding to be almost a must-have now with lots of organizations that are looking at that Thought Farmer. Now, calendar, just having a project calendar. What are the milestones for this project? Who should be involved in these events? Just having the opportunity for those project pages, those project group areas to be able to have some order around the events that are taking place. So the next step there is, or the next item there is group spaces. So again, where's all the documents going to be managed? Where's all the calendar going to be? Where's the updates going to be taking place for this project? You'd likely set up a group space. And what you want to look for there is the ability to set up templates. Right, so this is like a use case efficiency. So like, yes, you know that your project managers are going to be setting up these project groups, but you know they're going to be doing it often, right? So like, how do you make it a lot easier for them? And that could be like a really interesting way to get buy-in from the project managers, right? If you could say like, hey, listen, right now when you have to set up a new project group, it's tedious, right? It takes lots of different pages, lots of different steps. And now look at this new platform where there's a project template, you press duplicate, and now all of that work that took you maybe a half hour, 45 minutes to do for setup has taken one click, right? And then all of a sudden you're gonna get this adoption, this want for people to use this new system. Document management, again, just collaboration on documents, having a checkout and check-in feature, being able to embed documents from elsewhere, right? Office 365, Google Drive, those are all things you should be looking at in regards of how people are getting their job done and where's content living now. One thing to note is that you're not going to always be able to transition people from what they're using now, right? Especially if it's Google Drive, even Office 365, there's some nice features involved there as well, that it's nice to be able to look for something that can play nicely with these different systems. Wikis, everybody loves wikis, right? So, you set up a parent page, you create child pages and child pages to it, be able to edit and move. You should have that available in a lot of these kind of project group spaces, but even throughout your intranet, that should almost be, again, one of those things that's a must-have for these modern intranets. Now, version history, this we find to be important just because you want to be able to track changes, right? From like a user action, from a content change kind of perspective as well. Within Thought Farmer, every user action, every content change is tracked from the day that you launch, right? So auditing wise, you will have all that information available to you. All right, and now we're going to get into an interesting case study that Kelly is going to talk about here.
Thank you, Amol. Great. So we work with a digital transformation consultant agency called TangoWork, and they specialize in intranets and digital workplaces. And they recently did an amazing job at creating use cases for a client, which was a nonprofit called Coast Mental Health. So as you can imagine, as a nonprofit, they don't have a large budget. So any technology they invested in absolutely had to provide a specific outcome, and it had to address any inefficiencies within their organization. So Chris at TangoWork took the time to meet with many of the employees, conducting interviews, and he was able to create an extremely detailed mock user journey of what the day looked like for an average employee. Now, this detail may seem extensive to some, but it's a great way of determining who the potential end users would be, the challenges they endure every day, and what they might need from an intranet. So just to walk you through this, so we have right here, it's Tanya Turner. She's the manager. She manages 12 staff, works 9 to 5. She's been there for a while, and she works at the Riverview location. So one of the things she does on a daily basis is reviews policy changes. So Tanya reviews a series of emails about policy changes, and she searches through the policies to find the changes. And so she comments that it's hard to keep up. You know, she can't keep up with these policy changes, and it's only going to get worse as accreditation approaches. And so this, therefore, creates the opportunity. And so Chris was able to learn that the best opportunity for this is e-learning or microlearning to ensure compliance and continued accreditation, to deliver continuing education in small digestible chunks. The other thing she does on a daily basis is discusses new policies in a team meeting. So at the all staff meeting, the main topic is the recent policy changes, and staff say it's difficult to find the policies that they need. If the search was better, I wouldn't be hearing these complaints. And then the opportunity is to improve the search experience, especially for the policies. And the other thing she does is spends a lot of time orienting new hires. And if anyone works as a manager, they probably know the frustration of trying to onboard new employees. Oops. So she says, I really like this new onboarding checklist, you know, we made for new hires at our site. I should make this available to other managers, but where? So she's got this great checklist, but where's she going to put it? And then the opportunity is in the discussion forums on an intranet. So providing a place where employees can share ideas and learn from one another. And I think that's over to you, Amol. And just...
Excellent.
Excellent.
We
went through a case study. One of the things to keep in mind here as well is that all of this information that we kind of ran through today is going to be available in this white paper that Kelly had created from scratch there called Internet Use Cases. It really kind of gets into details about all of the use cases that we talked about today, but also format. Right, really kind of giving you the insight to be able to go through that and formulate your different use cases in a way that makes sense. And it's also really important for when it comes to like buy-in, right? Like there's gonna be some moment in time where you're gonna have to get some executive buy-in. If you can formulate these kind of wants of the objectives for the internet, the needs of it, through the perspective of different people in the organization, right? That's going to get a lot easier to be able to kind of sell in the organization and get that buy-in from the rest of the people that you needed. All right, I think now we are ready for some questions.
Yes, and we do have a few questions. So Catherine's asking, can you speak more on how this helps with an internet cleanup or doing a reorganization of pages?
This is like, this is going to be a challenge with any organization that has an internet that's been around for at least a couple of years, right? There's going to be this thing that we often call as content sprawl. There's certain things that you can help do to help kind of reduce the amount of content sprawl is having really strong governance right from the beginning, right? So making sure that there's somebody kind of overseeing the internet, but then whoever you're distributing responsibility to, just ensuring that they are following those kind of best practices for keeping up content up to date, making sure stuff that's not needed is being archived, being deleted. Now that's nice to be able to say, right? But like actually practicing that is a little bit different. And so there's still going to be content sprawl, even if you ask people to do that. And so what you should be looking for is the ability to have some kind of spring cleaning taking place in the internet, and then having some kind of reporting available for that. So within ThoughtFarmer now, you are able to create this kind of still content report to be able to see what pages within our intranet has been viewed less than 2 times in last year. So that's kind of your parameters there. And then you see all the content that may fall into that kind of inactivity there. And then you can make some decisions, right? Do we archive this content? Do we delete this content? That is something that you can do now. However, within the product roadmap of ThoughtFarmer, we are going to be adding in additional enhancements for this exact use case, right? 2 years down the road, we need to be able to clean up content. How do we do that? So we are going to bring in some functionality to help do that, just in some reporting mechanisms there as well. That'll make that a little bit easier.
Thank you. And Alicia is asking if form flow is included with ThoughtFarmer version 9.
Yep, you bet. So version 9 is the first version that we had FormFlow in, and so FormFlow is something that has been around for about a year and a half now. Each release we're evolving it, right? When we first came out with it in November of 2018, it was very kind of like a lot of the strong building blocks were there. You could make basic forms, you could do some basic workflow, and then what we wanted to do was get it out there in the wild, right? See our clients using it, see how they're using it, allow them to raise their hands and say, hey, this is what else we need. This is some other additional functionality that we need. And an example of something that came up recently was the ability to have ad hoc approvers. I think I'm saying the approvers is the right word, right? But the ability to be able to kind of change that workflow after a submission has gone through, right? So that's something we didn't have in the beginning. We have that now. But again, we're really kind of looking for our clients to be able to provide feedback. But it's available in version 9 on premise and also in the cloud.
Okay, and Susan is asking, what about a use case for an executive?
Yeah, that's a really interesting one, and one that you should really be thinking about as well, right? It's actually maybe that could have been a good point for today's webinar too, is the executive, what is an executive looking for, right? And I think the executive, when they're using the intranet, what they're trying to do is make sure that their thoughts, especially around strategy, where the direction of the organization is going, is that everybody's on the same page, right? And also I think the executive team is understanding that there's a lot of good information, lots of opportunity of sharing best practices and collaboration between staff themselves and staff to leadership team, right? When oftentimes we're thinking about communication in an organization, we're thinking top down, right? And that's super important, right? Here's our quarterly one strategy information. Here's our annual strategy information. It's really important to have consistency for that. In this scenario, coronavirus, having leadership communication, providing it to your staff is critical. Like this is how it should be coming, right? It's coming from the leadership team. But what we're seeing more now is the want for bottom-up communication and then lateral communication, right? So bottom-up being the ability for your staff to be able to provide some input to your executive team. So the use case is I, as an executive team member, would like to set up an executive leadership blog so that I can communicate to my staff and then also get their feedback, right? So there's the use case. How do you solve that? Okay, well, you set up a blog within the intranet. You have that person writing on it, the executive writing once a month, right, within that blog, and then you open it up for commenting, right? So commenting is super simple. This gives the ability for your staff members to share their voice. 2 value adds, right? One value is that your staff feels like they have a voice, and second is that the executive team is understanding how that message was received in the organization, right? So I think that's super important. Like that's one of many use cases for executives that they would need the internet for, right? But again, I think like communication is one thing that you would really want to explore for the executives.
Thank you, Amal. And one final question. Steve was asking sample questions to ask colleagues to determine their intranet objectives.
Yep. So I think like there's many different types of questions you can ask, and this is all laid out in the use cases white paper as well on the types of questions you want to ask. Like there's different ways of going about it in regards to formulating use cases. There's doing like surveys, right? Kind of getting some ideas about how people are doing things that way. There's focus groups, but the best way of going about it is job shadowing, right? So having a list of questions and then like taking the time and just sitting beside somebody and seeing how they're getting their job done, right? Because there's going to be things that you are going to identify as somebody looking over somebody's shoulder that they think is totally normal and totally fine and there's no issue with it, right? And like the use case could be, here I am as a project manager, I am going to go look for this document to be able to set up some kind of new project thing. And now you as an observer are watching their path to complete that task. And you're noticing it's taking 15 different clicks to be able to get to that document, right? And for them, it's just memorization. They've done it in less than a minute. They're not thinking that it's a problem, right? They're not seeing it as a pain point, where then you looking over their shoulder saying, you know what, that would be much more useful if that was just like a bookmark or if that was just simply a link. Now that person has one click, right? So instead of it taking 1 minute, it's taking 10 seconds. You save 50 seconds, you times that by the amount of staff, all of a sudden you're seeing this great ROI. But I think like the questions are important, but just observation is even more important, right? Just taking the time to understand how they're getting things done.
Thank you, Amal. I think that is all the questions we have. But of course, if you want to get in touch with us after the webinar, you can reach out to me, Kelly at thoughtfarmer.com, or you can reach Amol at thoughtfarmer.com. And just a reminder that we have the white paper that you can download that, as I mentioned before, goes into a little bit more detail. We also have a white paper on building a business case, and I think a lot of things we talked about today, it does sort of remind me of the white paper because we do break down, there is a section in there where we break down the different use cases, what executives are looking for, what HR professionals are looking for. So all that information is available on our website. And then we will follow up shortly with the recording of the webinar. So thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time.